June 5, 1967, 7:45 a.m. The air over the Mediterranean is unnervingly still. Below the radar floor, nearly 200 Israeli strike aircraft are flying in absolute radio silence. To the Egyptian radar operators in the Sinai, the screens are empty. The Middle East is a powder keg. Then, the climb. A sudden, vertical surge into the morning sun. Israeli pilots pull their sticks back. They peek over the Egyptian airfields. In Cairo, the first blips appear too many to count. Within seconds, the silence is shattered by the roar of the first 500-pound bombs. Hangar doors are blown inward. MiGs, the pride of the Egyptian Air Force, are turned into charred skeletons. In 10 minutes, the balance of power in the Levant has been liquidated. A gamble of breathtaking audacity. This is the Six-Day War. This is how the Middle East was forged in 144 hours of fire. The decade leading up to 1967 was not a peace, but a slow-motion collision. The region was a chessboard for the Cold War, but players had their own agendas. By the mid-1960s, the Pan-Arab movement, led by Gamal Abdel Nasser, reached a fever pitch. He sought to unite the Arab world under a single banner, opposing Israel. The tension wasn't merely ideological, it was visceral and hyper-political. A war over water had broken out as Syria attempted to divert the Jordan River. Border skirmishes were no longer isolated incidents, they were rehearsals. By May 1967, the friction turned into a vacuum. The Soviet Union passed a false intelligence report to Nasser, claiming Israel was massing troops on the Syrian border. It was a lie, but the spark Nasser needed. He moved 100,000 troops into the Sinai. He ordered the UN emergency force to leave. They obeyed. Then came the strangulation. Nasser closed the Straits of Tiran, blocking Israel's only southern maritime outlet. Under international law, this was an act of war. Israel's Prime Minister, Levi Eshkol, hesitated. The Israeli public, haunted by the Holocaust, began digging mass graves in city parks, expecting a second annihilation. The world watched a small nation surrounded by a coalition. On paper, the Arab coalition had doubled the men, tripled the tanks, and 4 times the aircraft. To any rational analyst in 1967, Israel was a doomed enclave. History is often decided by the friction between 2 types of men, the orator and the technician. Gamal Abdel Nasser was the orator, a master of the airwaves, his voice echoing through every coffee house. He was a populist who mistook his own rhetoric for military readiness. His generals were often political appointees, more skilled at navigating Cairo's bureaucracy. Nasser believed that by sheer weight of numbers, Israel could be intimidated. Opposing him was the technician, Moshe Dayan, appointed defense minister just days before. Dayan, alongside Chief of Staff Yitzhak Rabin, understood a fundamental truth. Israel had no strategic depth. They could not afford to lose a single mile of territory. While Nasser's military was rigid, the IDF was built on command by negation. Subordinate officers were expected to improvise, to push forward, even when out of contact. The Israeli high command was obsessing over the exact number of seconds to refuel a Mirage fighter. The psychological gulf was wider than the Sinai. Nasser was fighting for glory. The Israelis were fighting for the ground beneath their feet. The Israeli strategy was a masterpiece of deception named Operation Focus. For weeks, Israel allowed its pilots to fly routine training missions at the same time every morning. They knew Egyptian officers took their breakfasts at 7:45, a shift change when vigilance was lowest. They knew Egypt's most sophisticated radar systems would be blinded by the sun. Geography was the ultimate silent player. The Sinai is a vast, baking wasteland. To conquer it, one must control the passes. To control the passes, one must have total air superiority. On the morning of June 5th, Israel's entire air force, save for 12 jets, was in the air. At 7:45, the strike hit. 11 Egyptian airfields were struck simultaneously. The Israelis used specialized dibber bombs to penetrate concrete, rendering runways useless. The Egyptian MiGs were trapped on the ground, sitting ducks for strafing fire. In less than 3 hours, the Egyptian Air Force had ceased to exist. But as smoke rose over the Nile, a catastrophic failure of communication occurred. The Egyptian military, terrified of telling Nasser the truth, sent out reports of victories. These lies reached King Hussein of Jordan. Misled, he ordered his artillery to shell West Jerusalem. The war was now a multi-front struggle for the soul of the Holy Land. The ground war in the Sinai was a blitzkrieg that would have stunned Rome. Major Henad Ali's Rael Tal, a demanding perfectionist, led the charge. Israeli tanks used superior optics and training to pick off Egyptian T-55s from 2 miles away. In the central Sinai, Ariel Sharon executed a complex night attack at Abu Ghailah. It was a textbook combined arms operation. Paratroopers dropped behind enemy lines. The Egyptian defense collapsed, not because they lacked courage, but coordination. When the order to retreat was given, it was a rout. Thousands of soldiers were left stranded. The Sinai was a graveyard of abandoned Soviet hardware. Meanwhile, in the east, the battle for Jerusalem was reaching a bloody crescendo. Jerusalem was a labyrinth of stone walls, sniper nests, and ancient holy sites. They couldn't use heavy artillery for fear of destroying the historic city. It was a soldier's battle. By the third day, the breakthrough happened. The Temple Mount is in our hands, Gua famously radioed. For the first time in nearly 2 millennia, Jewish soldiers stood at the Western Wall. But while the South and Center were won, the North remained a wall of fire. The Syrian army was dug into the Golan Heights, a massive volcanic plateau overlooking the Galilee. From these heights, Syrian gunners had spent years shelling Israeli farmers below. The assault on the Golan on day 5 was an act of pure desperation and grit. When the top was finally reached, the Syrian defenses buckled under the sheer momentum. By June 10th, the guns went silent. The map of the Middle East had been violently redrawn. Israel had captured the Sinai Peninsula, Gaza, the West Bank, Golan Heights, and Old City of Jerusalem. They had tripled their landmass. The Arab losses were staggering, over 15,000 Egyptians dead. Israel lost approximately 800 men, a heavy price, but a military miracle. The political aftershocks were a 9.0 on the Richter scale. Nasser, humiliated, offered his resignation. But the Nasserism that had dominated Arab politics was dead. The dream of pan-Arab unity shattered. In Israel, the euphoria was intoxicating. The nation moved from brink of annihilation to empire. This transition created a psychological shift that persists to this day. But with that confidence came the burden of occupation. Over 1 million Palestinians were now under military rule. Every war of this magnitude hinges on a single, catastrophic mistake. In 1967, it was the Arab High Command's reliance on prestige over precision. The Egyptian military was structured to protect the regime, not the country. Information flowed upward as a filtered stream of lies. When Israeli jets hit, commanders blamed others. There was also the victory trap. Nasser convinced himself and allies that moral weight would ensure victory. They focused on the why of the war and ignored the how. They failed to account for the technical proficiency of the Israeli pilot and tank commander, and the terrifying efficiency of the Israeli intelligence service Mossad. Overconfidence on the Arab side met a backstood the war desperation on the Israeli side. It was a recipe for a tactical slaughter. The legacy of the Six-Day War is in the 21st century. The war essentially created the modern Middle East. It solidified the US-Israel strategic alliance. It pushed the Soviet Union to rearm its clients, leading to the Yom Kippur War of 1973. The conflict introduced the world to the electronic battlefield. It changed the way military academies taught mountain and desert warfare. But the most haunting legacy is the geography of the conflict. As the sun sets over the Golan Heights today, rusted husks of Syrian tanks still sit in the tall grass, their barrels pointed toward a valley they'll never reach. A silent, oxidizing monument to 6 days, when the world tilted on its axis. A stark reminder that a single week can be an eternity. The echoes of those 6 days didn't fade. They became the background radiation of the modern world, permanent shadow cast by a war that changed everything, but settled nothing.